August 12, 1940. At 20,000 feet above the channel, a formation of RAF bombers cut through the thin, frigid air. Inside each aircraft, gunners gripped their .303 Browning machine guns, eyes scanning the horizon for the first glint of German fighters. Messerschmitt Bf 109 streaked toward them, engines screaming, anticipating an easy interception. But the British crews were ready, trained to anticipate, to track, and to fire with deadly precision from extreme altitude. Flight Sergeant William Bill Harding, a tail gunner on a Wellington bomber, adjusted his oxygen mask, peering through the gun sight. Every twitch of the bomber's tail could spell life or death. Every enemy approach had to be anticipated with split-second timing. Around him, tracers streaked outward, cutting through the morning light, meeting the enemy's rapid dives. For Luftwaffe pilots, these defensive formations were more than obstacles. They were lethal machines, each gunner a singular, deadly focus capable of destroying a fighter before it even reached attack range. The first Bf 109 approached from the port side. Harding's finger tightened on the trigger, and in that instant, precision, training, and instinct merged. At 20,000 feet, the war was not just between machines, but between the skill, courage, and nerves of men suspended above Europe, and the enemy who underestimated them. By the summer of 1940, the skies over Europe had become a deadly arena of technological innovation and human endurance. The Luftwaffe, confident after rapid victories in Poland and France, turned its attention to the skies over Britain, seeking to establish air superiority in preparation for a possible invasion. Bomber Command, though initially conceived for offensive missions, now faced the urgent task of defending British airspace. Strategic necessity transformed every bomber into not only a weapon but a fortress, its gunners forming a lethal shield against enemy fighters. RAF crews were meticulously trained for high-altitude combat. Operating at 20,000 feet introduced unique challenges. Thin air, freezing temperatures, and reduced visibility made precise targeting difficult. Gunners like Flight Sergeant William Harding endured these conditions constantly, relying on physical endurance, mechanical precision, and mental discipline. Each gunner had to calculate speed, trajectory, and timing, predicting enemy approaches across 3 dimensions while coordinating with their formation. Accuracy was not incidental, it was a matter of survival. The British recognized that technological advantage could only be realized when paired with extensive training and unwavering focus under extreme conditions. Bomber formations were carefully structured to maximize defensive coverage. Wellingtons, Hamdens, and later Lancasters flew in diamond or V-shaped patterns, tail and dorsal guns overlapping fields of fire. Each gunner's position was critical. A lapse in focus could expose an aircraft to fatal fire. Communication between aircraft was constant, though constrained by limited radio channels and the roar of engines. Formation discipline demanded that each crew member operate as both an individual marksman and part of a collective weapon system. The Luftwaffe, by contrast, favored aggressive, high-speed attacks with tightly coordinated fighter wings. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Bf 110s relied on speed, firepower, and intimidation to overwhelm defenses. They expected gunners to be reactive, to miss at extreme ranges, or to hesitate under pressure. The RAF's emphasis on accuracy and anticipatory shooting confounded these expectations. From 20,000 feet, British gunners could track, lead, and engage incoming fighters with a precision that was often lethal. For Luftwaffe pilots, each approach carried the constant possibility of sudden damage or destruction, even before weapons could be effectively deployed. The psychological component was as critical as the mechanical. Gunners had to remain calm under extreme stress, anticipating enemy maneuvers while enduring fatigue and fear. Flight endurance training included repeated exposure to simulated attacks, force targeting exercises, and mental conditioning to maintain focus during extended sorties. This preparation transformed individual gunners into experts in high-altitude marksmanship, capable of exploiting minor errors in enemy approach angles or formation discipline. Their skill turned what Luftwaffe pilots assumed would be easy attacks into deadly trials, where miscalculations often proved fatal. By August 1940, the Luftwaffe had launched multiple raids over southern England, testing British defences and probing bomber formations. Each engagement reinforced the importance of gunners' accuracy. Reports from captured Luftwaffe pilots and post-mission debriefs repeatedly highlighted the deadly effectiveness of British defensive fire. The perception that a single gunner could destroy an approaching fighter added a psychological burden, forcing German pilots to adapt tactics, often at the cost of cohesion and efficiency. British success was not solely technological, it was a product of disciplined training, precision, and the relentless focus of crews operating under extreme conditions. This high-altitude defensive model also had strategic implications. By inflicting measurable losses on attacking fighters, bomber crews delayed Luftwaffe dominance in the skies, protecting vital infrastructure and maintaining morale on the home front. Every successful defensive engagement demonstrated that the combination of human skill, mechanical preparation, and tactical ingenuity could neutralize the perceived advantage of superior numbers and firepower. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners embodied this principle, proving that mastery of skill at 20,000 feet could inspire fear in even the most confident Luftwaffe pilot. Operating at 20,000 feet presented unique challenges for both gunners and pilots. The thin air reduced engine efficiency, limited maneuverability, and made temperature regulation a constant concern. Crew members relied on oxygen systems to maintain consciousness, while exposure to frigid conditions could sap strength and focus. Yet it was precisely at this altitude that British defensive accuracy became most effective. Gunners trained to anticipate enemy speed, flight path, and attack vectors could leverage both gravity and distance to deliver precise bursts of fire, forcing Luftwaffe pilots into evasive maneuvers or catastrophic errors. Bomber formations emphasized overlapping fields of fire. Tail gunners, dorsal turrets, and waist positions were arranged to create mutual coverage, ensuring that no approaching fighter could penetrate without being engaged by multiple weapons. This network defense demanded rigorous coordination. Each aircraft's crew had to maintain formation integrity, communicate effectively, and monitor both their own sector and the broader formation. A single lapse, an unfired turret, a distracted gunner, could expose a bomber to lethal fire. The result was a system in which the collective skill of the gunners multiplied defensive lethality, making each attack a high-stakes trial for the Luftwaffe. Technological factors reinforced these human efforts. British defensive turrets, stabilized and often powered, allowed gunners to track fast-moving targets with mechanical assistance, while sighting systems accounted for speed, distance, and lead angles. Machine guns were calibrated for high-altitude conditions, ensuring consistent performance even in extreme cold. Maintenance crews meticulously checked every component, understanding that even minor malfunctions could compromise an aircraft's defensive potential. The combination of technology and training created a scenario in which attacking fighters were consistently at a disadvantage, despite their numerical or tactical superiority. The Luftwaffe faced significant challenges in countering these defenses. High-speed attack runs required precision timing and coordinated maneuvers, yet every approach exposed fighters to intersecting lines of fire. German pilots quickly learned that tight formations were vulnerable. A single aircraft straying too close to a defensive turret could trigger cascading chaos as gunners exploited misalignment. Even experienced pilots found that the cumulative firepower of multiple gunners made each engagement unpredictable and dangerous. Reports captured after missions frequently described the chilling accuracy of British gunners, a factor that influenced future Luftwaffe tactics and instilled caution in even veteran aces. Psychologically, the threat of precise defensive fire at extreme altitude shaped pilot behavior. Luftwaffe crews approached with caution, often hesitating or breaking formation to reduce exposure. These adaptations reduced their offensive effectiveness, giving RAF bombers additional leverage. The mental strain of anticipating lethal fire, combined with environmental hazards, increased fatigue and stress, compounding operational risk. British gunners, by contrast, gained confidence with each successful engagement. Mastery at 20,000 feet became both a practical and psychological weapon, transforming the high-altitude battlefield into a space where skill and discipline outweighed raw aggression. By late summer 1940, the pattern of engagement was well established. RAF formations operated with deadly efficiency, blending human precision with technological reliability. Every sortie reinforced the reputation of British gunners as an unpredictable and lethal adversary. Luftwaffe reports, intelligence assessments, and pilot testimonies consistently emphasized the difficulty of attacking at high altitude. The combination of environmental, mechanical, and human factors created a scenario in which fear, respect, and caution defined Luftwaffe behavior over British-controlled airspace. These conditions also influenced strategic decisions. The British ability to repel attacks from 20,000 feet protected vital targets, delayed German objectives, and provided critical intelligence on enemy tactics. Each engagement contributed to a broader understanding of aerial combat, shaping doctrine, training, and operational planning. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners became embodiments of a system that fused skill, courage, and technology into a coherent defensive force. Their accuracy at extreme altitude was more than a technical achievement, it was a decisive factor in sustaining Britain's resilience in the early months of the air war. The human element was at the core of high-altitude defensive effectiveness. Flight Sergeant William Harding, like every RAF gunner, faced extreme physical and psychological demands. Operating at 20,000 feet meant coping with oxygen deprivation, freezing temperatures, and the constant roar of engines. Maintaining situational awareness under such conditions required extraordinary concentration. Gunners needed to track multiple fast-moving targets simultaneously, anticipate enemy maneuvers, and react with split-second precision. Every burst of fire was calculated, balancing lead angle, speed, and distance. Fatigue was relentless, yet the mental discipline instilled during months of rigorous training allowed gunners to remain steady under pressure. Human endurance, nerve, and instinct became the decisive factors that turned mechanical tools into lethal instruments. Even the most sophisticated technology could not substitute for focus and judgment. Pilots and gunners alike knew that survival depended on mastery of both mind and machine. The fear instilled in Luftwaffe crews was not merely a product of equipment, it arose from the lethal competence and resilience of British airmen who operated at the extremes of human performance. Tactics at 20,000 feet were complex and unforgiving. Formation flying was central to defense. Overlapping fields of fire meant that approaching fighters faced concentrated and coordinated resistance from multiple angles. Gunners were trained to fire in disciplined bursts, conserving ammunition while maximizing effect. Engagements required anticipation, positioning, and timing. A single poorly coordinated attack could be exploited by a combination of gunners, forcing enemy fighters to overshoot or break formation. RAF tactical doctrine emphasized flexibility. Gunners had to adapt to varying attack vectors, adjusting their fire to the speed, altitude, and trajectory of enemy aircraft. Each formation acted as a unified weapon system, multiplying the effectiveness of individual skill. Luftwaffe pilots quickly learned that standard attack procedures often failed against coordinated, anticipatory defense. Tactical mastery turned defensive operations into offensive deterrence, transforming each sortie into a carefully orchestrated struggle of skill versus aggression. Technology amplified human skill, and the RAF relied on innovations to enhance defensive accuracy. Powered turrets, gyroscopically stabilized sights, and carefully calibrated machine guns allowed gunners to track high-speed targets more effectively than manual systems alone. Weapons were meticulously maintained to ensure consistent performance in extreme cold and low air pressure. Mechanical reliability, however, was only effective when paired with expert operation. Gunners had to understand the limits and capabilities of their equipment, predicting recoil, bullet drop, and target behavior at 20,000 feet. Aircraft design also contributed. The Wellington and later bombers provided fields of fire that allowed gunners to cover each approach vector efficiently. German pilots underestimated these capabilities initially, assuming that high altitude would reduce accuracy. In reality, the combination of technology, formation discipline, and human skill created an environment in which each defensive turret became a lethal instrument capable of dictating the terms of engagement. Leadership in high-altitude bomber formations was subtle but decisive. Squadron and flight commanders were responsible not only for navigation and mission success, but for coordinating defensive strategies across multiple aircraft. Every decision, from altitude adjustments to formation changes, could influence the effectiveness of gunners against approaching fighters. Leaders instilled discipline, ensuring that crews maintained focus, followed procedures, and executed maneuvers precisely. Flight Sergeant Harding, while not a formal commander, demonstrated leadership through action. By maintaining composure and accuracy under intense pressure, he set a model for his fellow gunners, influencing morale and operational efficiency. Leadership at 20,000 feet required both foresight and adaptability. Commanders needed to anticipate enemy maneuvers while enabling individual initiative. A single act of calculated judgment, by a leader or experienced crew member, could shift the dynamics of engagement, demonstrating that effective leadership was inseparable from operational success. The Luftwaffe's approach to high-altitude attacks underestimated the precision and resilience of British gunners. German pilots, trained for aggressive interception, relied on speed, surprise, and massed formation tactics to overwhelm defenses. Yet at 20,000 feet, every approach carried heightened risk. British gunners could track, lead, and deliver accurate bursts with deadly effect. Luftwaffe reports from 1940 repeatedly cited the chilling accuracy of these defenses, noting how a single gunner could incapacitate or destroy an aircraft before it reached optimal firing range. The psychological effect of this reputation influenced operational decisions. Pilots hesitated, adjusted attack angles, and sometimes abandoned coordinated maneuvers to reduce exposure. Enemy confidence eroded with each engagement. By transforming predictable approaches into hazardous endeavors, IAF gunners reshaped the tactics and mindset of German pilots, creating a battlefield in which fear, caution, and uncertainty were as potent as any physical weapon. The moral dimension of high-altitude engagement was profound. Gunners like Harding were tasked with lethal responsibility, defending lives on the ground and ensuring mission success while engaging in deadly combat. Decisions were executed in fractions of a second, whether to fire, when to conserve ammunition, and how to prioritize targets. Each choice carried consequences not only for the airmen but for civilians below and the broader trajectory of the war. Courage was defined not by recklessness, but by disciplined, deliberate action under extreme conditions. The psychological burden of operating at 20,000 feet, where error often meant death, added weight to each engagement. Yet it was precisely this moral responsibility, fused with skill, training, and situational awareness, that transformed gunners into formidable defenders. Their ability to act decisively, ethically, and effectively under intense pressure became a defining characteristic of British air resilience and a source of fear for the Luftwaffe. August 12, 1940. 20,000 feet above the Channel, the first wave of Luftwaffe fighters emerged from cloud cover, streaking toward a formation of Wellington bombers. Flight Sergeant Harding, stationed in the tail turret, adjusted his oxygen mask and gripped the .303 Browning, scanning for movement. The German Bf-109s dived with precision, engines screaming, expecting minimal resistance. But British defensive formations were ready, each gunner prepared to exploit even the slightest error. The opening exchange was immediate. A Bf-109 approached Harding's bomber at an estimated 320 miles per hour, closing rapidly. Anticipating the trajectory, Harding led the target carefully, squeezing the trigger in controlled bursts. Tracer rounds streaked upward, intersecting the fighter's path. The pilot reacted too late. Smoke trailed as the aircraft veered sharply, retreating to regain control. Around him, dorsal and waist gunners engaged simultaneously, creating a network of intersecting fire that forced multiple Messerschmitts into evasive action. The Luftwaffe's initial advantage of speed and surprise quickly began to erode. Each maneuver by the gunners was calculated. Harding and his counterparts anticipated enemy reactions, predicting evasive rolls, climbs, and dives. The Germans attempted to adjust attack angles, but overlapping fire zones prevented safe approaches. Flight dynamics at 20,000 feet magnified the consequences of errors. A misjudged dive or overshoot could result in fatal exposure to a second gunner or collision with another aircraft. Every action, every adjustment, was a high-stakes negotiation between skill and survival. Coordination across the formation amplified the effect. Tail gunners covered the rear, dorsal turrets swept vertical approaches, and waist gunners monitored flanks. Communication relied on prearranged signals and disciplined situational awareness. Messerschmitts that evaded one line of fire quickly encountered another. Each bomber became a small fortress, yet the formation functioned as a collective weapon system. The Luftwaffe, expecting isolated targets and reactive gunners, encountered a precision network that exploited every tactical weakness. The intensity increased as the engagement unfolded. Harding's turret tracked a second Bf-109 diving from above. He adjusted for speed, altitude, and distance, firing in precise intervals to maximize impact. The German fighter flinched under sustained bursts, smoke beginning to curl from its engine. Another attacker attempted a high-speed portside approach, only to meet converging lines of fire from two gunners simultaneously. The Messerschmitt rolled sharply, struggling to regain control. Within moments, the Luftwaffe formation was fragmented. Confidence eroded as pilots realized that every approach could result in severe damage or loss. Environmental factors compounded the danger. Thin air affected engine performance and maneuverability, both for bombers and fighters. Cold temperatures made controls stiff, while oxygen limitations required constant monitoring. For the gunners, maintaining focus amidst these challenges was critical. Harding's training allowed him to manage physiological strain while executing precise, lethal fire. The human and technological elements merged. Instinct, experience, and mechanical reliability created a force multiplier that overwhelmed enemy assumptions. As the engagement continued, the Luftwaffe adapted with evasive clustering, attempting to outflank the bombers. Harding and his fellow gunners anticipated these tactics, adjusting fire to intercept projected paths. Successive attacks were repelled with remarkable efficiency. Each bomber survived not by chance, but through meticulous coordination, individual skill, and disciplined execution. Observers would later note that the Luftwaffe, initially confident, exhibited hesitancy and caution that marked a psychological shift in high-altitude operations. By the end of the first wave, multiple Bf-109s were damaged, some forced to retreat. Harding's turret had inflicted hits on 2 fighters, while other gunners contributed to several more critical strikes. The encounter demonstrated a central truth. At 20,000 feet, British gunners were not passive defenders, they were a dynamic, anticipatory, and lethal element, capable of shaping the engagement before enemy pilots could react. Survival, for the Luftwaffe, was now a function of caution, timing, and respect for an enemy whose precision and discipline instilled fear across the skies of Northern Europe. The Luftwaffe, regrouping after initial losses, launched a second, more coordinated wave. 3 Bf-109s approached from the starboard side, banking in formation to strike the bomber line. Flight Sergeant Harding's turret swiveled, tracking the lead fighter. Every muscle, every decision, was honed to a razor's edge. At 20,000 feet, there was no room for hesitation. Milliseconds determined life or death. The first fighter dove, engines screaming, guns primed. Harding anticipated the trajectory, calculating the precise lead. Controlled bursts ripped through the approaching plane's fuselage, sparks and smoke trailing as it veered uncontrollably. The second Bf-109 attempted to exploit the distraction, diving steeply from above. Harding's turret rotated seamlessly, intersecting the fighter's path with precision fire. Simultaneously, dorsal and waist gunners engaged, creating a converging wall of fire. The German pilot executed evasive rolls, but the overlapping zones made escape impossible. Within seconds, the aircraft was crippled, forced to disengage. The third fighter, the most experienced of the group, attempted a high-speed head-on attack. Harding adjusted elevation, considering airspeed, gravity, and recoil. He fired a timed burst as the fighter passed, hitting the engine. Smoke streamed along the fuselage, forcing the pilot into evasive maneuvers at extreme risk. The bomber formation responded collectively, banking to maintain overlapping defensive coverage. The coordination of gunners and pilots turned what could have been a devastating attack into a carefully controlled engagement in favor of the defenders. Enemy pilots reacted with caution, breaking formation and attempting to outflank. Luftwaffe intelligence later described the paralyzing effect of concentrated fire at high altitude. Even highly trained aces found that precise defensive fire limited maneuver options, disrupted attack patterns, and reduced confidence. Every approach was now a gamble. Success required avoiding multiple intersecting lines of fire, adapting instantly to gunners' anticipatory techniques, and maintaining situational awareness under extreme stress. Harding continued to track the retreating Bf-109s, his focus unbroken despite the physical strain. Oxygen deprivation and freezing temperatures were ever-present threats, yet training and mental discipline allowed him to maintain steady aim. Around him, gunners coordinated silently, each action reinforcing the next. The Luftwaffe's once confident formation was now scattered, their speed advantage mitigated by the lethal precision of British defensive fire. Each bomber acted as both target and weapon, turning the tables on the attacking fighters. By mid-engagement, several enemy aircraft were forced to disengage entirely, trailing smoke or returning to base with damaged engines and control surfaces. Harding's turret had directly contributed to 2 confirmed kills, while overlapping fire ensured additional enemy damage. The psychological impact on the Luftwaffe was immediate. Pilots were cautious, tentative, and increasingly aware that every approach could result in destruction. Fear, respect, and frustration replaced confidence in their ability to dominate high-altitude encounters. The battle's intensity gradually diminished as the remaining German fighters withdrew to reassess their tactics. Bombers adjusted formation, accounting for minor damage, and crews monitored each other's status. Every aircraft had survived, thanks to the combined precision, coordination, and resilience of its gunners. The engagement became a textbook example of how human skill, mechanical reliability, and tactical foresight could nullify numerical and technological advantages. Strategically, the encounter reinforced a critical lesson. At 20,000 feet, British defensive firepower could impose significant constraints on Luftwaffe operations. Future raids would be tempered by the knowledge that gunners could track, predict, and eliminate threats before fighters achieved optimal firing positions. The encounter transformed the perception of IAF gunners in the minds of German pilots. Accuracy at extreme altitude was no longer an abstract advantage, it was a tangible, deadly force capable of shaping the outcome of every sortie. As the bombers continued toward their target, crews reflected on the narrow margin between survival and destruction. Every maneuver, every burst of fire, had been a high-stakes negotiation of skill, anticipation, and courage. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners had proven that mastery at 20,000 feet was decisive, forcing the Luftwaffe to recognize that fear, respect, and caution were inseparable from future operations over British airspace. The engagement would echo through operational reports, intelligence assessments, and training manuals, becoming a benchmark for the lethal efficiency of British defensive gunners. The immediate aftermath of the engagement was a mixture of relief, damage assessment, and tactical analysis. All IAF bombers returned to base, though several bore minor damage from near-miss attacks. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners, exhausted from sustained high-altitude operations, began recording reports of enemy approaches, hits, and evasive maneuvers. These accounts would later serve as critical intelligence for operational review and training improvement. 2 Bf-109s were confirmed destroyed, several more were damaged, and Luftwaffe losses were compounded by forced withdrawals and disrupted formations. The numerical advantage of the attackers had been neutralized through disciplined skill, coordinated fire, and rigorous high-altitude training. Operational debriefs highlighted the effectiveness of British defensive doctrine. Gunners were praised not only for marksmanship but for situational awareness, anticipation, and communication within formations. Reports emphasized that the psychological pressure exerted on Luftwaffe pilots was as significant as the physical destruction of aircraft. German fighters, accustomed to rapid, aggressive strikes, found themselves reacting to a network of calculated defensive fire. Intelligence officers noted that repeated exposure to such defenses contributed to measurable hesitation and disruption in enemy tactics. The human factor was repeatedly emphasized in after-action reviews. Pilots and gunners alike had demonstrated remarkable endurance, focus, and precision under extreme conditions. Training in oxygen-deprived, frigid environments had prepared crews for the physiological strain of 20,000 feet, while simulated attacks and live-fire exercises honed split-second decision-making. Each successful engagement reinforced confidence in both individual skill and collective tactics. For gunners like Harding, survival was contingent not only on accurate shooting but on trust in fellow crews and adherence to formation discipline. Maintenance crews played a crucial role in sustaining operational effectiveness. Aircraft that sustained minor damage were quickly repaired, refueled, and inspected for any compromise in turret operation or structural integrity. Gun calibration and turret maintenance were meticulously documented, ensuring that lessons from the engagement were applied to future missions. The seamless integration of human skill, technical reliability, and procedural discipline was central to the RAF's ability to withstand and repel attacks at extreme altitude. Strategically, the encounter had immediate implications. Luftwaffe Command noted increased caution in high-altitude raids, adapting flight plans to minimize exposure to overlapping fields of fire. The effectiveness of British defensive gunners delayed Luftwaffe objectives, disrupted operational tempo, and maintained critical control over contested airspace. Each successful sortie reinforced the broader principle that technological superiority alone could not overcome disciplined human skill. RAF crews became both a physical and psychological obstacle, compelling the enemy to recalibrate their approach to combat over British airspace. The engagement also influenced the RAF's training doctrine. Gunners' success underscored the necessity of rigorous high-altitude preparation, coordinated defensive strategies, and effective communication. Crews were encouraged to study prior encounters, analyze enemy behavior, and refine techniques for timing, aiming, and coordination. The integration of operational experience into training ensured that the lessons learned at 20,000 feet would propagate across Bomber Command, creating a continuous cycle of improvement. The wider impact of the engagement extended far beyond the immediate battle. Luftwaffe Command, analyzing the encounter, recognized that high-altitude attacks over British formations carried significant risk. Even experienced pilots faced the constant threat of accurate, anticipatory defensive fire. Reports described not only aircraft losses and damage, but a pervasive psychological effect. German crews approached future raids with caution, adjusting tactics to minimize exposure, often at the cost of cohesion and offensive efficiency. Fear of British gunners became an operational factor, influencing the timing, formation, and strategy of Luftwaffe operations over southern England. For the RAF, the engagement validated the effectiveness of its training, tactics, and aircraft systems. Crews understood that survival was grounded in precision, discipline, and coordination. Each gunner had become a force multiplier, converting individual skill into collective defensive power. The experience reinforced morale, instilling confidence in the ability of a disciplined, well-trained squadron to survive and repel superior numbers. Strategic planners recognized that such outcomes directly affected enemy decision-making, delaying raids, reducing aggression, and buying valuable time for defensive infrastructure and operational readiness. The encounter also shaped tactical doctrine. Formation integrity, overlapping fields of fire, and anticipatory gunnery became non-negotiable standards. Intelligence and operational reports highlighted the necessity of ongoing high-altitude preparation, emphasizing endurance, mechanical familiarity, and the development of rapid decision-making under stress. Gunners were trained to think ahead, predicting enemy maneuvers and coordinating with wingmen to maximize defensive coverage. These lessons informed subsequent missions, ensuring that the cumulative experience of each engagement enhanced the overall resilience of Bomber Command. Psychologically, the engagement demonstrated the lethal consequences of misjudgment for attacking forces. Luftwaffe pilots, who had initially assumed numerical superiority would guarantee success, encountered a defensive system that imposed discipline, precision, and fatal consequences for error. Fear became a tangible factor in combat. Pilots learned to anticipate not only enemy fire but the extreme accuracy with which it could be delivered. For British crews, this interplay of skill, courage, and technology reinforced the moral dimension of their work. Each defensive action was both a protective measure and a demonstration of human capacity under extraordinary pressure. The strategic ramifications extended to the broader air war. RAF defensive effectiveness disrupted Luftwaffe objectives, protected critical infrastructure, and limited the enemy's ability to gain air superiority over Britain. Each successful high-altitude engagement served as both a deterrent and a model for tactical evolution. German commanders had to reconsider attack formations, timing, and the allocation of experienced pilots to minimize attrition. British defensive skill forced a recalibration of risk, demonstrating that mastery at extreme altitude could offset numerical and technological disadvantages. In sum, the engagement exemplified the confluence of human skill, mechanical reliability, tactical innovation, and psychological influence. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners became central figures in a broader operational narrative, showing that mastery of high-altitude defensive fire could alter the course of air campaigns. The fear instilled in the Luftwaffe was not incidental, it was a direct result of sustained preparation, rigorous training, and the disciplined application of skill. Accuracy at 20,000 feet became both a weapon and a deterrent, transforming the dynamics of aerial warfare and shaping the strategic environment over Britain for months to come. The engagement at 20,000 feet was a defining testament to human skill, discipline, and courage. Flight Sergeant Harding and his fellow gunners demonstrated that survival and effectiveness were not determined solely by numbers or technological superiority, but by the precise application of training, anticipation, and judgment. Each burst of fire, each coordinated maneuver, reflected a mastery of skill honed under extreme physical and psychological pressure. At this altitude, where error could mean immediate destruction, precision was both a practical necessity and a moral imperative. The encounter also highlighted the inseparable link between man and machine. The Spitfires, Wellingtons, and their turrets were tools, yet they only achieved lethal effectiveness when paired with human instinct and experience. Mechanical reliability, careful maintenance, and sophisticated design allowed gunners to project deadly accuracy across vast distances, but it was their skill, foresight, and composure that transformed these machines into instruments of survival and dominance. At 20,000 feet, technology and human capability converged, shaping the battlefield and redefining what was possible in aerial warfare. Beyond tactics and technology, the engagement carried a profound psychological dimension. Luftwaffe pilots, previously confident in numerical superiority, faced a calculated, anticipatory threat that imposed caution, disrupted formations, and introduced fear into every mission. Conversely, RAF crews drew confidence and resilience from each successful defensive action, reinforcing morale and operational effectiveness. Courage was defined not by aggression, but by disciplined action under extreme risk, a principle that became a hallmark of British defensive strategy. Historically, the encounter exemplified how skill, preparation, and human resolve could transform the dynamics of war. Accuracy at extreme altitude, cultivated through rigorous training, tactical innovation, and unwavering discipline, created a battlefield in which fear, respect, and caution shaped the decisions of even the most experienced enemy pilots. Flight Sergeant Harding's actions, and those of his fellow gunners, serve as enduring reminders that mastery of skill and composure under pressure can decisively influence outcomes, leaving a legacy of courage and precision that resonates far beyond a single battle.